If you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. Let's talk about Crimson Tide.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Daniel, do you want to let the people know what we're here to discuss today?
So, this is Have You Seen, in which we talk about a movie that some of us know well and others have just seen for the first time. This week, we are talking about Crimson Tide, which is a 1995 submarine thriller about the crew of a nuclear submarine who are deployed to during a Russian civil war in which rebels have seized nuclear weapons and have threatened, amongst others, the United States with those weapons. So the crew of this nuclear submarine are sent out and they receive an order to launch their nuclear weapons at the silos in order to destroy them before they can be launched. And then they receive another order that is interrupted because they're being attacked by another submarine. And a debate breaks out among the crew and among the captain and the executive officer about how to interpret those orders, with one saying, "We received a clear order. We have to launch the nukes. And if we don't, there might not be a country to go home to." Whereas the executive officer says, "We received a second order, so something must have changed. And if we get this wrong, we might start World War III for no reason." And so the plot then unfolds from there as these two officers kind of engage in an argument and a struggle for control of the submarine. So, what did you think of Crimson Tide?
Firstly, I think it's a really good, really well acted movie. I think it's simple in its idea, in its setting. Obviously, being based on submarine, so very limited on scope of where you can go, locations and things like that. You're really confined to the submarine, and in those type of movies where you're limited in locations and settings, the characters really have to work, and the story and the plot really has to shine to, really make the movie come together. And I think they delivered. I think everyone put in a really strong performance. I thought again it was like quite simple in its debate over, and I think I say simple not in a negative way, but simple in as in it's easy to follow sort of the story and the debate, and it was very simple in terms of, like you mentioned, one set of orders came in saying that they should attack, and then the other one was interrupted, and it's okay. It's now a dilemma. What do you do in that situation? You've got millions, if not billions, of lives at stake, and one decision, either way, can completely change history forever. And the characters have to wrestle with the idea and essentially try to make the best of that situation. And I thought it was fascinating. I thought it was interesting. I thought it created good talking points. I thought it created a good debate in terms of perceiving war, in terms of decision making, and being absolutely sure and really taking your time to actually understand the full scope of the situation before fully going in any direction. Because again, once you commit to something, that changes history forever. So I thought on that level, I thought it was a very, very enjoyable movie.
Yeah, I think this movie really lives by the argument between the two characters and the way the two characters are kind of brought to life, right? Like you have to really get a feel for who they are and why they do what they do, because if their decisions and choices don't make sense, then the entire movie doesn't work, right? And I think this absolutely works in that sense. And like I said to somebody the other day, like this could be a stage play where it's really just the two people arguing, right? And then there's other characters who kind of give them updates about what's going on, and that informs their choices and how they update kind of their perspective on what needs to be done, right? So like I really like small movies that happen in one place with a small number of characters and they just have choices to make, and they're put in a stressful situations and they have to kind of cope. And that is something that this movie I think does really well.
No, I agree, and like you said, the movie definitely gives the audience, or gives the viewers, enough knowledge on each of the captains to understand their perspectives, to understand where they're coming from, to understand why they view the world the way that they do, and why they would go with a certain sort of decision. Of course, Hunter's character, you see a lot at the start of the movie about his family, what he stands by, like what he has to lose, etc. And there's different comments that he makes about his views on nuclear war and who the real losers are in those situations. And you can really see that he is a man that understands the consequences of war and isn't afraid to make the tough decisions, because again, you see him in this movie make tough decisions because he's a person that values life and he's a person that cares about life, but is put in situations where he has to make tough decisions. And you kind of see him sort of have to wrestle and live with those decisions. And then on the flip side is the other captain, where it's a little bit more old school, a little bit more regimented. You know, comes from like very old school mentality. Is all about following the chain of command, all about following the rules and things like that. So I think they did a really good job of just really capitalizing each of the different captains and the different perspectives.
Yeah, I think that really hits the nail on the head of why this movie works, which is that both of them have a point, and they might not like. I do think it's a cop out a little bit in the end, where they say, "Well, you were both right." Right? It's kind of a cop out, but at least in the moment, both of them have reasons. Both of them have good reasons, and both of them come at it from a perspective where they say, "If this other person gets their way, then terrible things would happen." Right? And it's not clear that either of them are correct, because, like in the scenario in which now these Russian rebels really are launching nukes, then there is not like you can't wait, right? You can't wait for confirmation. You can't talk it out. You can't wait until everything is fixed. You kind of have to act in the moment. And if that is what's actually happening, then the consequences of not doing what the captain is wants to do is in fact disastrous, right? So I think that really like that is really the reason why I suggested this movie, which is that so many movies kind of don't really do this, right? Where one person is clearly right and the person who's wrong needs to be overcome, and everything is fine once the correct person is in charge or gets their way or whatever. And this movie is not really like this, right?
No, I wouldn't say it's like that. Even though I did feel like, or I did get a sense that Hunter's character was probably correct, and it would turn out that the second message would be that they should stop the attack that they were about to launch. Even though I kind of had that feeling during the movie, it's not like they portrayed Frank in a super negative or super evil light where they made you dislike him for the sake of disliking him because you need a hero and a villain in the story. It's like again, you can see things from his perspective. You can see how he feels he's right in the situation, and he isn't super callous. I mean, he does come close to it when he puts the gun to Welps. I think it's like Welps or something like that's head, and then the other crew member. But you can almost kind of see that he's half bluffing, but also he's not, because the fate of the world is at stake, and he believes he's completely right, and he needs to launch these missiles ASAP. But they don't characterize him as super villainous or evil or just doing bad things for the sake of doing bad things. And even at the end, when they're at the showdown, he kind of still, once he sees that they've got the radio back up and running, or once he sees that Hunter's so steadfast on getting the second message, and the information coming through is that they're working on the radio and they're about to fix it and it's close to it, he allows time. He allows time and room for him to be wrong, so that they don't have to launch the codes, launch the nukes at the site.
Yeah, it's a little bit convenient, right? Like where kind of the resolution comes down exactly at the moment, like just in time, right? Because they have this countdown where I say, okay, for like 1 hour after the rebels start fueling the missiles, like that is our window to destroy them, right? Like, if we go over that window, they can launch before we get to them, and they have like 3 minutes to spare or something like that, right? So it's leaning on the scales a little bit. There's also other ways where I think there's one thing that never gets refuted, where Hunter says something like, well, first of all, we have satellites watching us, so if they see us not doing anything, they know something is up and they will try something else. And also there's at least two subs, or multiple subs, that are sent on this mission, and so if we are compromised because our communications are down, then the other one should be fine, right? And that one is also being watched by the satellite. And I want to say that almost breaks the story, because at that point that kind of makes Hunter correct, right? Because he like now you can actually like afford to wait or not do anything.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely takes away from the stakes, and it definitely takes away from the urgency needed to actually act and launch. But I don't know. Like I'm trying to see it from Frank's perspective in this, is that because he's so patriotic and because he's so, he cares so much about his country, is that he doesn't want to leave it up to chance. He doesn't want to leave it up to the idea that someone else might be able to sort of, step in when he isn't sure for certain. Even though, Hunter explains that like they've got satellites and there's other, nearby. It's like, again, in that situation, because of the gravity of the situation, you have to know for certain. And in Frank's case, it's either he does it or no one else is going to be able to step in and stop it.
Yeah, and that's the part that's not true, right? Like if what Hunter says is actually correct, then there are other people. You know what I mean? Like so the reason I like this movie so much is because like the performance and the argument between the two officers, it's what really sells it. But there's like a couple of details here where the dilemma is not quite as strong as it could be or as it really needs to be in order to create the stakes. And the kind of I think there's one of them. Yeah, and I think like in general, I think he has a valid point, right? Like you don't know, like by the time you find out who's right, it's too late, right? I think that's really what it takes, or like that's really what the story really needs. And that's like a fairly small thing. Just don't have the second sub there, or have it be destroyed. And no, they are the only ones. You know what I mean? Like that, it would be so easy to fix. So that kind of every time I watch this, it kind of stands out that like that's like a really obvious oversight where they just say, well, like where they actually kind of undermine a little bit like the actual dilemma that drives the entire thing to the point where it's not really a dilemma anymore. One of the things I really like about this is how much they care about the process, right? So, like the entire movie is really about uncertainty and about not making mistakes, right? And one of the ways in which this is reflected is that we see them go through like there's this elaborate process, right, where they receive the order and the order comes with a code, and the code has to match like an authorization that they have on board, and three people or four people have to confirm that the code is legitimate, and so it's a real order, and so they do it, and there's an entire thing where one person unlocks the safe, gives it to the captain, and all of these steps, right? And these are all designed to prevent mistakes and prevent the wrong person doing the wrong thing, right? It's like not some cowboy pressing a red button. It's like it's like a 27 step process that's designed to you only use these weapons if you really have to, right? And we see them go through this process three times. The first time is a drill, right, where everybody is pretty much like the only reason people are stressed is the fire, right, which is kind of unrelated, but everybody like as far as the drill is concerned, everybody is pretty relaxed, and it's very routine. They've done this 100 times. They know how it goes. Everybody knows what they're supposed to do, right? And then the second time is when they've received the launch order, and that is where things are more tense because now it's real, right? Like this is the first time they've been in this situation, and they hoped to go through their entire career never having to go through this, right? So, but now they have to, and that is kind of where Hunter kind of starts defecting, right? That's where he says, no, actually, this is not a clear order. We need to wait for clarification out of that. And then they do it a third time in the end, where they get the second order and they have to authenticate it. And so they're doing it again. And now they're doing it as enemies, right? But they're still kind of on the same side, and they both kind of just want to do what like they don't try to defeat the other person. They just think the other person's wrong, right? But now they're kind of like there's this tense undercurrent to the procedure, right? Like to the steps. And I always kind of really like this where we kind of get like the rules are explained like in a safe context, and then when it happens for real, we don't need any explanation. We already know what happens, and we know why it's important that the executive officer does not repeat the order and stuff like this, right? Because we've seen them practice it. So I think that's a really big part of the movie where number one, it's really well done and it's really tense and it's kind of fun to watch like these professionals do kind of their thing. But then also it kind of has this effect of kind of explaining the rules of like what is supposed to happen, and then when it doesn't, we understand why it's significant.
And what I actually liked about it, and it's just a small detail, was like the first time that it happens on the executive order that they receive, as they're reading out the code to authenticate it, they show it on the piece of paper, just kind of again like emphasize the process and emphasize the steps that they're going through. But then on the last shot, on not the last shot, but the last time that they do it, when they get the last order in, is that they focus in on the characters' faces and they focus in on just like them in that final moment of that final confirmation as to which direction they're going to go. And it's a small detail, it's probably a little bit insignificant, but I just liked it. I don't know, I liked it a lot because it's just like really centered on the characters in that last time. And again, it's like they've trained the audience. We don't need to see it on the sort of piece of paper. Them understand sort of them authenticating the code that's on the piece of paper. It's that they're just reading it out, and you understand the steps that they're taking. You understand what they're doing as they're reading it out. But we then have that nice moment where we can actually really focus in on the characters as they get the sort of realization that they don't actually have to launch the sort of missiles at the nukes.
Yeah, that's a good catch. Another one I caught is that every time they do the drill or every time they go through the sequence, it's a little bit slower and people make more mistakes. Right, like the first time in the drill, everybody it's kind of a game, right? Like they've done it many times, and everybody kind of has their thing, has their part ready. Like there's this one where kind of the two officers kind of read out the codes, and then they have to agree, and then the executive officer has to confirm again, right? And then when it happens for real, they hesitate a little bit. They're just a little bit slower. I think one of them stumbles over the words and has to repeat, and it's just slower. And like that, really, like because we've set a benchmark of what this is supposed to be, then when it's a little bit slower and a little bit clumsier, it's like like that kind of under like reinforces the idea of what these characters are thinking, and now they don't have to say it.
And I think that's like a thing that the movie does really well is really show the characters wrestle with the situation that they're in or wrestle with the decision that they have to make. I think the one that I noticed the most was Welps when they're running the coup and they have to get him on board because he has the code or he sort of knows the combination to the safe to be able to get the trigger or something like that. I can't remember what it is, but they really narrow in on him and his emotions and the dilemma. And I think someone says to him that think about your family, and he's like, that is what I'm thinking about. He is thinking about his family on both sides of things. And again, he's like a good a representation of someone that's almost like stuck in the middle as to which way they lean because he kind of sees it from both sides. If he can prevent launching the missiles at the nuke site and preventing a war, he would rather do that. But at the same time, he also has to think about his family and that if he doesn't act, then these nukes might be sent to America and they might kill his family. And you really see him go through the struggle of not wanting to turn his back on Hunter and not wanting to turn his back on that possibility, but at the same time realizing that the second message really didn't come in and the current orders are to launch the missiles. And if he doesn't, then he might lose his family. So I thought that was like a real highlight of the movie.
Yeah, exactly. Like and all the different characters really kind of orbit that same kind of space, right? Where like you've got the two main officers who have to make their choices, right? But then everybody else also has to make a choice in terms of what side to pick, right? So first of all, we spend a lot of time, like I want to say almost half an hour, if not like maybe a little less, where we just get to know them, right? So we see is it Hunter and Webbs, right? We see them at the birthday party, so we see them kind of with their family, so that reinforces, what they have to lose, right? And what motivates them. But we also see the crew kind of just goof off, right? And kind of be obnoxious sailor types. Like for at least 10-15 minutes or something like that. And we have like the officers dinner, right, where they have these big high-minded debates about like philosophy and what war is for, and these big ideas. And we know that they're going to have to act on those ideas, but to them this is like shop talk, right? Like this is nothing special. But we see them go through a lot of this stuff, and a lot of them are really obnoxious for much of it, right? But that means to me that we kind of know kind of that they're humans, like they're not robots, they're not simply executing a machinery. They're not part of a machinery. They're people, and there's people have to make choices, and those choices can change history. And I think like every time I watch it, like the first 20 minutes are a little bit tedious. Like it's like, can we get to the submarine stuff already? But I feel like if it wasn't there, then they would not be as humanized, and that would undermine kind of the idea of like people have to make these choices.
Especially when it comes to Welp and Hunter, because again, their families spent time together. They were at the birthday party together, so it kind of shows that they were also friends outside of just the service that they were doing on the submarine. So then, when it comes to time for him to make that decision, it becomes a lot more difficult for him because he's going against someone that he cares about, someone that he really deems as a friend. So it adds a little bit more weight to the choice that he's making in that. And yeah, just kind of like overall, just kind of echoing what you're saying is that again, it's like as we get to know everyone, as we sort of understand, even the silly debates when they're fighting over who the proper Silver Surfer is, or the references to things like Star Trek and stuff like that. It just shows more of the people's characters and their interests and things that they care about, and it's like these are kind of just like small reminders of things you could potentially lose when it's time to go to war, and it just reinforces. And again, it's like for the Surfer argument, it's a really dumb argument. It's like who cares? But when you're in a situation like that, you're kind of again under a lot of pressure because of the situation you're in.
Yeah, it kind of it's just the spark that sets off the argument, right? It like it's not important, right? Like, and I think everybody involved knows it's not important, but the fact is that they are under pressure and tense, and they just need like something will just set them off, right? And it's the dumbest thing.
Yeah, that's kind of just like another strength of the movie. It's just the characterization of everyone and really bring into life just them as humans and people.
Yeah, and then we've got like people like the chief of the boat. I think it's Walters, who he's the driver, right? And he's the last mission before retirement, keep your head down, just follow orders type, who then ends up siding with Hunter, right? And I think like a lot of emphasis put on that guy, and like there's not much to him, right? Like in terms of his reasons for making those choices, but just this idea that just some guy might be the linchpin, right? He might be the deciding factor as to how this goes, right? And like each one of them that kind of sides with one or the others, and so like two mutinies essentially at the same time. I think like this movie tried to get support from the Navy, and they basically rejected it because the plot involved a mutiny on a nuclear submarine, and that was just a little bit too spicy for the Navy. So I don't know how realistic all of this is exactly, but the like this whole like the way like just forcing people to make a choice, right? And like this ties again into this theme of how like the cost of making a wrong choice, right? Like that's writ large with the atomic missiles, but it's also like which side you pick could spell disaster, right? But if you don't do anything, then you're still like like nobody's neutral in this. Like everybody has to pick a side, and even if you just sit there and follow orders, that's still picking a side, right? So I think on a thematic, like it might not be the most realistic thing or whatever, but I think thematically, like kind of it all ties together where everybody is constantly afraid of making the wrong choice, right? Like Webb's is the same way, right? Where he says like he ultimately he decides who this these weapons get fired at, and if he makes the wrong choice, it's on him, right? It's like ultimately he's getting an order, but he could refuse the order, and then because he's the only one who knows the codes, he ultimately decides whether or not the order is real, right? So I think that is something that's throughout this movie as well.
And again, it just kind of goes back to an earlier point of just like reinforcing the steps to actually launching a missile and the chain of commands and stuff like that, because you just kind of like as you're just talking there, it's just like touching on all the different people that are involved in it. Well, it's the person that's like driving the boat and stuff like that. It's just really, really just kind of highlights how, and again, it kind of like again whilst we've got the two captains that are arguing for their specific point of view, it just then further highlights how the dynamic just isn't with just them, and it really, again, like I said, brings to life the other characters in this, because they also have to make decisions, and the decision that they make also is on their hands and also has massive effect. So that adds to the level of drama, and then it makes it a case of, it's not just this nameless group versus that nameless group, and they're just picking sides because we need people to pick sides for each of the captains. It's like, no, like each of them has to really wrestle with the idea of it, because blood could be on their hands, or either way it is, like blood could be on their hands, and they have to live with that.
And there have been people in history who have been in that situation, right? Like, off the top of my head, I can think of two events in the Cold War where it came down to a guy at a button and them deciding whether or not to push it, right? So the Cuban Missile Crisis got very close to an escalation, right? And there was another one, I think, in the 80s, where there was like a NATO kind of maneuver, like an exercise, and somebody somewhere on the Soviet side thought it was like a real troop buildup, and so the order started being passed to kind of fire up the nukes. And then one guy who was supposed to push the button said, "No, this is not real. I'm not doing it. I'm not making that call. If I'm wrong, then you can shoot me afterwards, but I'm not putting that on my conscience." And so there's this basic situation of like having that weight of that decision rest on somebody that is real, right? Like one of the things about nuclear weapons is that it's not simply one person killing another, right? It's a person deleting a city, and potential, and the threat of retaliation and escalation that can potentially like lead to the death of millions, if not more. It's like the amount of responsibility that sits on these people is incredible, right? And that is why they have this entire process, and that's why so many people are involved. So it's not simply one person having to make a choice, right?
Yeah, and you're a bit of a history buff as well, because I know they did say in this movie that I think they changed the order of command or something like that, and it was now the president that had the authority to launch the nukes. I don't know what the current process is for that, and how it works.
Yeah, so that thing is not I'm not entirely sure about, because I don't know what happens if like communications are disrupted. Like, do you just not fire? Like do you not just not use your nukes in that situation? I know that there are countries like the UK has a rule where like there's like nuclear subs just cruising the ocean, right? Just and every morning they check if BBC Radio 4 is still broadcasting, and if it doesn't, they fire the nukes, because BBC 4, Radio 4 or whatever it's called has been broadcasting almost for 100 years every day, and if it stops, that means that UK is no longer exists or has been conquered or whatever, right? So their rule is check the radio. If it's not working, fire the nukes, because like so much has to happen, right? Like that, it can't be just like somebody, like there's a power outage and so the radio stops. Like there has a lot more has to happen, and the thinking is like this is the last thing that goes down. It take like basically means London has been nuked, or like the country is occupied or whatever. It's like it has to be that bad for the signal to stop. So it's like, so I'm not, so for that reason I'm not and I think there's other countries too, like if I had to guess, France probably has a similar policy, like and but I don't know that for sure. But it's like I'm just not sure if it's correct that like since 1996 like a submarine needs a direct order from the president in order to launch a nuke. I don't know. If you're a United States president listening, let us know. I'm really curious about that. But it feels a little bit convenient, right? Like it's like the next year they decided to make this change, which kind of feels like it follows from the events of the movie, but it doesn't. Well, it does, but like that would be a hell of a coincidence, right? If that is actually what is the case, and it just seems like there would be a protocol like for what happened if something disastrous happens, right? And at some point maybe the submarine captain actually does need to make that decision. I don't know. So but it's like this question of, okay, like we're now thinking about like the worst of the worst scenario, right? Like so much has gone wrong, like so much awfulness has happened. What do you do then, right? Like is there any benefit in actually still retaliating at that point, or is this just like this is just spite or whatever it is? But I don't know, like it's I would have to double check if there if like what the actual rule is, and I'm not like and I've not looked this up before we recorded, and I don't think it's really all that important, but it just seems like, as stated in the movie, it feels a little bit convenient, where it kind of just basically says, well, we built this movie around this interesting dilemma, and we kind of explored what it's like the events of the movie are not really about, look why this process is terrible, because so much has to happen before it actually went that poorly, right? Like this whole thing about there being two orders and one of them is incomplete, and the XO and the commanding officer, they like the captain, both happen to disagree, and there's like the crew is split down the middle. Like, in order for this plot to happen, a lot has to go wrong, right? So I'm not even sure that, like, let's assume that, like, this is correct, like this is what happens. I'm not even sure it's like a reasonable reaction to an event like this, because it's not like a predictable like failure of the system, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. Like you said, there's a few leaps that have to be taken before you actually get to a situation where you like you was in this movie, and I think you can kind of like forgive it because it is a movie. But yeah, no, just the whole like thing about who presses the button and who has sort of that executive power. It was just like kind of fascinating and something that I just kind of thought of as I was watching the ending of the movie. But I did have another question, and it was around Hunter's decision to close the hatch on one of the bays as three people were in there trapped. And that was kind of a time where you see him have to really make a tough decision, and a decision that went against what he was really about, because he was very much about preserving life and trying to save people, and trying to do things in the right way to help as many people as he could. Do you think that the movie did enough with putting him in that tough situation? Because I kind of think I kind of felt like it happened, but it didn't really change him, or nothing really changed after that particular moment, and I was a little bit disappointed by that. But again, correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, so what happens is that there's like a fire. No, that's after they get attacked by the Russian submarine, right? So they get damaged, and there's flooding, and there's like three people trapped in this segment, and he has to kind of like close the hatch in order to prevent the flooding from spreading. And his choices are kill three people by trapping them in there, but everybody else lives, or have compassion with them, but then everybody dies because the hatch doesn't get closed in time, right? So I think that's just a way to reinforce the idea that when it comes down to it, he will do what he thinks is right, even if he doesn't like it. Right. So this is not, and the way this relates to the main argument of the movie is, he's not arguing against launching the nukes because he's some big pacifist, or because he can't stand the idea that somebody would use nuclear weapons. It's because he actually thinks this, like this is a mistake, right? Like, he does say in the beginning, when he has the when the two, like, when the officers have this big argument over like what war is for, and they kind of quote Clausewitz, where they say, like, the purpose of war is not to kill the other guy, it's to achieve a political objective, and you win when you've achieved your political objective and the other side has stopped trying to stop you. And first of all, like, a Hollywood movie kind of quoting Clausewitz correctly is kind of cool, but also it kind of this it kind of reinforces this idea, or what I was trying to say is, Hunter essentially says at that point, like, this might have been true 200 years ago or 100 years ago, but when we're dealing with nuclear weapons, like, the goal should be to avoid the war in the first place, because the consequences of fighting it are so severe. And that seems a little bit like a strange take for like a military officer. Like, it seems like somebody in that position, like, this seems a little bit like a very privileged point of view, like somebody who will never have to make that kind of choice. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of how it comes across. But at the same time, like it shows that he's basically saying, okay, we have to be really sure. Like, if we're gonna use this, we have to, like, it has to be for a really good reason. And the thing about the hedge, I think, reinforces the idea that when there is a good reason, he will get his hands dirty. He will do the terrible thing because it's overall for the greater good. Kind of that's kind of how I took it.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. Like as you explained that, I understand it from that perspective a little bit more. No, no,
because
that makes
because
sense.
he because we see him kind of agonize over it afterwards a little bit, but he doesn't actually say I shouldn't have done this. Right? He kind of recognizes, yes, I understand, even in hindsight, that this was the right thing to do, and it's still terrible. I'm gonna still feel awful about it, but that doesn't change the fact that it was correct. And like to me, that kind of reinforce like hints at the idea that if he thought there was a valid order, if he thought there was a good reason, then he would have confirmed the order to launch. One other thing I wanted to bring up is like the final the ending in which they have this tribunal like with the admirals and whatever, where they basically have to like where they basically face the consequences of their actions, right? What did you think about that part?
I thought, like you said, I thought it was a bit convenient that they were both deemed as right, but again, at the same time, is that I think in that moment, Frank's character had understood that whilst Hunter had kind of broken chain of command and hadn't followed his orders, he did it for the right reason and eventually was right and actually saved the country from really going to war and sort of escalating a nuclear war across the world. But like I said, it was a bit convenient that they were kind of both right. They both got a decent ending to sort of the movie. But at the same time, again, it's like it's not like Frank's character was portrayed to be evil or spiteful or sort of vengeful or anything like that. It was he just wanted to follow what he felt was right in that particular moment. So yeah, I see it as convenient, but at the same time, I don't feel like there needed to be just punishment for either of them in that particular situation, just because they were both. And again, it turned out that Hunter was right, but in a moment where you've got one order and the second order hasn't completely come through and you don't know what it says, then Frank's right in that situation, and you go by the first order and you go by what's sort of been confirmed as your order. So yeah, it's a difficult one. Like again, it's convenient, but I don't disagree with the convenience of it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I agree about that, right? Like the Navy has to kind of think about what should these people have done, not who ended up being correct in this case, right? Because Hunter is kind of correct by chance, right? Like it's not his accomplishment that he is correct. It's kind of the story kind of conspires to make him correct because we like he's the main character, right? Um, so I think there's a little bit weak. It doesn't seem like this is like a responsible and thoughtful response from the Navy, right? Also like the fact that like you said, it's a massive cop out to just say, well, you were both right. Like no, no, not exactly. And one thing that really is really weird is how Hunter doesn't even get to make a statement. He like Frank just makes a statement and basically dares Hunter to disagree with him, and at that point he just says, no, like I've never known you to lie and you're not gonna start now, so I guess your statement is enough. That's a really weird move. Like shouldn't you have shown both of them give statements, and maybe like they kind of again, there's a few different ways you could have done it, but one way would have been to kind of have them give statements and they kind of start out very different and then but end up in the same place, or the other way around, or just showing that they're both professional officers who were making a decision based on what they thought was correct and valid and so on, based on the information they had at the time. No, something like this, right? It just feels like the movie kind of stops trying at that point.
Yeah, I did feel it was weird that they didn't allow him to speak or put his point across or say how he felt. And again, maybe it's because it wasn't completely his victory. Again, it was like a kind of circumstance that it happened to be the case that the second order was to not launch the nukes. So maybe there wasn't a monologue or a point that needed to be made in that particular moment, but it was with.
Yeah, but it's like if you're a hunter, like your entire career is on the line, right? You are being charged with like insubordination and mutiny and all of these things, and like you're not going to defend yourself. You're not going to put your version on the record. Like it's just weird. Like especially since he's been so principled up until this point, right? Like it's not like he's ever shied away from an argument or from standing up for himself or for what he thinks is right. And here he just kind of waves it, and it's just kind of weird.
Yeah, I think that's just like movie doing movie stuff at that point, especially because they'd shown up until that point how sort of strict everyone followed the guidelines and how strict everything was sort of done by the books up until that point in the submarines. I think it's just a case of like movie just doing movie things and you know making or giving like the audience one last moment of oh did Frank maybe do him over, but then kind of showing that no, they actually just both kind of respected each other and they were both well meaning. So yeah, again, I wouldn't say it's the movie running out of ideas. I think it's just movie doing movie ending stuff.
Yet I
Um,
really hate that. Like this whole thing about oh, it's just a movie. Now, and you're not saying that exactly, right? But it's kind of going in that direction a little bit. Like I'm not gonna let a movie off the hook for having a weak story or weak ending or whatever, just because it's a movie or because whatever, it doesn't matter or whatever. Like the story is the entire point of the exercise, right? So the story like makes the statement about what the movie is about, and puts a context to what these characters do so that we can judge which of these were correct, right? Especially with a movie like this where it's supposed to kind of create a debate or ask the question, like, who was right? Like, what would you have done in this situation? What is the correct thing to do? What should the rules be, right? Like, is this going the way it should, or did this, like, were they set up to fail from the start? Like, all of these questions are kind of raised by the plot, right? And for everybody to kind of just shrug and laugh and hug at the end, like, I don't think you can justify that by saying, oh, it's a movie.
yeah, no, I agree. I agree with that. I agree with that for sure. I'm just kind of saying what how I think they kind of played out. But yeah, no, I agree with that. Especially when you're touching on the subject of nuclear weapons and nuclear war in a time where you'd just recently come out of a Cold War where it was a very real possibility of it happening. It's kind of again the movie is speaking of the dangers and speaking of the consequences of it for the most part, and I feel like that was just like a perfect way to just really with a bow and tie just kind of sum up its point in the movie through Hunter's character and through his statement.
Yeah. One thing I did like about the ending is how they're not enemies in the end. Like this whole thing about the horses and whether they're from Spain or Portugal, it's all a little bit tedious. But it's like they're not, like the movie makes it clear that even as they're waiting for the confirmation on the submarine, right? And then also in the very end, when they come out of like the tribunal, it's clear that they're not enemies, right? And they respect each other. They just thought they were wrong like the other person was wrong at the time. But they kind of respect that they respect each other as people. And I think that is something that the movie didn't have to do either. But I think it kind of gains a little bit by that being the case.
And it almost teases an escalation in the submarine when everyone starts to go and grab their sidearms from the armory, and each side has weapons. It almost teases to kind of turn into a bit of like action slop where you might have guns firing and people being killed on either side as they try to wrestle for control. But the movie shows constraint, and it shows it shows some sort of control of itself by not letting it escalate to that and actually just having it be a bit of a standoff. And it almost kind of mimics a nuclear war, a bit of a cold war in a bit of a sense that both sides are armed, both sides have weapons that will change the other person's lives, and it's a bit of a standoff, and it's all it takes is one person to be trigger happy and everyone, then there's consequences for everyone in that situation. So it kind of like mimics that a little bit. But yeah, I'm kind of glad that the movie didn't end up with a bunch of people having a shootout on the submarine.
Yeah, that's a good point. Comparing it to the dynamics of like a nuclear war, I think that that makes sense. Like just the consequence of one person making the wrong choice at the wrong time, and that can spiral into a massive escalation. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And they get close a little bit, right? Like there are moments where somebody roughs somebody up, and it could easily have gone off the road, off the rails, right? And there were multiple points in the course of the story in which it could have gone a different way if somebody had reacted differently. So yeah, I think that makes sense.
Last thoughts on Crimson Tide.
Yeah, so like just having seen this once before this conversation, what's your bottom line? Is this one worth watching again? And is this worth recommending?
I think this is a solid movie, definitely worth recommending in terms of the the story in the movie and the characters. Again, it's simple, it's easy to follow, it's easy to understand the different perspectives and different sides. It doesn't. I think it kind of leans into one direction over the other in terms of its view on nuclear war and things like that, but it doesn't kind of really bash you over the head with everything that's like wrong with nuclear war and like the army being bad and war being it doesn't kind of preach. It just creates a debate. It creates a dilemma, and then it allows you to question what would you do in that situation and how would you react, and you never know how you would react. And I think the movie does highlight that as well, is that through the draws that they do, is like you never know how you're going to react until you're in the real situation. And then when you're in the real situation, the pressure mounts and everything becomes tense, and you know any move that you make completely changes everything for the rest of your life. So I think the movie does a really really good job of just portraying his characters, portraying the struggle of having to make those decisions, and just having to sort of wrestle with those emotions. I think it does a fantastic job of that. So yeah, definitely one that I'd recommend. Definitely one that's worth checking out for sure.
Yeah, I agree. Like, this is not the most hard boiled thriller ever. This is not the most accurate or hard hitting portrayal of like nuclear war or the risks of nuclear war or things like that. But it's just a really strong character, drama where you put two people like into a conflict, and they disagree, and the stakes are high, and they have good reasons for believing what they believe, and they will fight for what they think is right, and it just happens to be incompatible with what the other person wants. And that is kind of why I recommended this movie in the first place, because so many movies don't do this. They're very one-sided. They only let one side be right, or they only let one side be reasonable, and the other side in many cases doesn't even articulate its position to the point where it doesn't make sense that anybody would actually have it, because there's no reasons. Your average movie, especially in the last decade or so, has really been like this. And when I saw Crimson Tide for the first time, I was like, this movie doesn't blow anybody away, right? It's just a solid movie. But the fact that like it articulates these two perspectives so well, and makes them make sense, and gives each character the conviction to stand by them even in the face of massive consequences, was just refreshing. And I wish the dilemma was a little bit stronger. I wish they took some of the safeties away, and that would only strengthen the dilemma. But just on a character level, on the level of, you have two people who disagree, and they have good reasons to, and they will fight for what's right, and like they have a good reason for thinking that their way is the right way. Like, on that level, I think this movie is up there as as doing that really well. So I would recommend it to anybody who cares about that, like conflict, and how conflict is motivated, and like how this kind of conflict can play out in a story.
Yeah, they should make it a requirement before you create a Twitter account to watch this movie, so that people can learn how to have a healthy debate without killing each other online, and understanding both perspectives. Because, yeah, that's a whole other conversation. But anyways,
Yeah,
so,
like some people just need to learn how to grab some guns and force their perspective, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Without killing the other person. With that, we reach the end of the episode. If you reach this part of the episode, as always, we appreciate your support. We appreciate you checking us out and supporting us on a journey. As always, if you enjoyed our discussion and you liked what we talked about today, you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought we were chatting a bunch of nonsense, you should probably tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
Bye
Heard
bye.
it first. Ciao.